In the early 1990s, a startup record label named Rough Rider Records signed a singles deal with Columbia Rough House for their flagship artist, DMX. The agreement was that if X's single was successful, then Rough House would follow up with an album deal. It was X's first real shot at fame. The song was called Born Loser. First verse opens with, "Born loser, not because I choose to be." Here's a clip from the second verse. When all I'm really eating is an oxidant sandwich. For those that don't know, that's two pieces of bread slapped together, or I'll have a range sandwich, depending on the weather. Born loser, caught up in the game, and I ain't even got nobody to blame. In a sense, DMX had already lived exponential lifetimes before that track even came out. The artist born Earl Simmons had already experienced one of the most traumatic childhoods you'll ever hear about. X tells stories about growing up in Yonkers and how his mother would severely beat him, leaving him battered and bruised. He's described waking up hungry and scared to tell his mother because she was still sleeping and the food was in her closet. He told VH1 once he was so hungry he drank some of his mother's perfume because it smelled good, so he figured it might taste good too. He was wrong. X talks about how one time his mother punished him by locking him in his room for the summer. He talks about how that experience expanded his imagination. Then one day, Earl's mother decided to take him on a trip. Rock the Bell's Roxanne Hunte recounts a conversation she had with X, explaining what happened next.
This is not what somebody told me. This is what he said to me. He said, you know, when he was younger, his mom had took him to a children's home and said that they was just going to visit. And she left him there. She took him there and she left him there. And he was too little to be there, too little to understand how to defend himself, how to take care of himself and everything else. But he did it and he survived it. And we all have our ways of dealing with it.
Jesus. That's the experience that birthed Dark Man X, an alter ego created by Earl Simmons to protect a child too used to trauma. Suddenly it all makes sense. Now, if there's a silver lining to the group home experience, is that that's where Earl fully connects with hip hop culture in a real way. All the kids were into it, either you rap or you DJ'd or you're a graffiti artist. Earl's thing was beatboxing. He loved it. So when he turns 14, he moves out of the group home, back to Yonkers, changes his name to DMX after the famous Beat Machine, and then teams up with a guy named Ready Ron, a 30-year-old artist who X looked up to as a mentor. The pair became notorious for another double R, rapping and robbery. Talib Kweli mentioned Ready Ron in a powerful conversation he had with DMX on Uproxx's The People's Party. If you don't watch The People's Party, punch yourself in the face. The question Kweli asked was really just about a hip-hop memory DMX might have had. This is where X took it. Watch this.
But this guy, man, this guy, he introduced me to what would be the best part of my life, which would be the rap. But he also, at the end of my life, is blessed with the curse. And the curse aspect of it was, like I said, I didn't smoke cigarettes, I didn't smoke weed, I didn't do anything. I'm 14 years old. And me and my man went to a robbery one night, and it was his birthday, and we came back, we split the money. I said, here, you know, take this, go get something nice for your birthday, whatever. So he came back with a blunt rolled up. And as I'm counting the money, he lights the blunt. And I said, I was impressed. I don't really smoke, nigga, fuck out of here. And he passed the blunt around. And, wow. And I hit the blunt, and I'm like, I was no longer focused on the money. I never felt like this. Like it just fucked me up. I'm like, the fuck. And I later found out that he laced the blunt with crack. My thing. Why would you do that to a child?
Right.
And this nigga like 30, you know what I'm saying? And he knew how I looked up to him.
Yeah.
He knew how I looked up to him, you know what I'm saying? And like, why would you do that to somebody who looks up to you like this, you know what I mean?
Sincerely, that's truly a powerful conversation. Check it out if you missed it. Links in description. But this is a synopsis of the first 14 years of DMX's life. This is 14 years before It's Dark and Hell is Hot. This is years before he even meets Wah and Dean, founders of Rough Rider Records, and signs to their burgeoning imprint. This is the underbelly of Born Loser, the track that they thought was going to change DMX's stars. They pushed it hard. According to DJ Kid Capri, he was the only one that played it. Track failed. Rough House never offered that album deal. Another dream deterred for DMX. If you haven't seen Rough Rider Chronicles on BET or DMX's VH1 Behind the Music or read Earl, the autobiography of DMX, I suggest all three. All three do a tremendous job of coloring the albatrosses Earl Simmons was able to scale throughout his life. Over the next 5 years in the mid-1990s, DMX became one of the most revered battle rappers in New York. There's a legendary tale of him going bar for bar with Jay-Z. Apparently no one knows who really won, but both won each other's respect. X was also instrumental in getting another Yonkers group called the Warlocks signed to Rough Riders. Puff Daddy passed on X because he was too gritty and wasn't marketable for his taste, but took interest in the Warlocks and signed them to Bad Boy Records, introducing them to the world as simply the Locks. The Locks landed a deal before DMX did, and DMX was the flagship artist. Now, Suge Knight and Death Row Records made a play for DMX once they heard Puff Daddy pass. Rough Riders declined because they didn't like the deal. Smart move. But with every step forward, it seemed like X's life took 4 steps backwards. Wrapped around each subtle rap success were numerous arrests, an omnipresent drug habit crippling his consciousness, and enough traumatic experiences for 8 lifetimes. And just when things couldn't seem any more futile, when it couldn't seem any darker and hell couldn't feel any hotter, in the midst of rapidly losing hope, X gets jumped in the illest example of ironic karma I've ever heard and nearly dies. He tells Rough Rider Chronicles, "I got accused of a robbery I didn't do. And because I'd robbed so many people, I was a likely candidate. But this was different. I got accused of that robbery because that person who robbed him, I ended up robbing them. And I had the goods. I had the guy's coat. I couldn't make this up. What the fucking odds are of that? Like really? Like really? So I give them the coat and he's like, yo, why don't you come with me? Yeah, I'll go with you. Who would go with somebody if they actually did it? I know I didn't do it. And so I went with them and they jumped me. Yeezus. DMX suffered horrific injuries because of that incident. Reportedly, pus was swelling in his throat. His jaw was broken. If he had waited any longer to go to the hospital, doctors say he would have died. Now here's the beauty that comes behind the struggle. While he's recovering, Irv Gotti, who worked closely with Rough Riders, landed an A&R position at Def Jam Records and implored Leor Cohen to sign DMX. Here's Leor.
The studio was littered with rappers. All of a sudden, DMX came in and his complete jaw was wired shut. And then he started rapping and I could hear the breaking of the wires.
Leor Cohen signed DMX that night. X finally secured the opportunity he'd fought for so long.
I rapped for 13 years before I got that record deal. I am a living example of it's darkest before dawn.
Now this is the part where 97% of us first meet DMX. This is when he drops It's Dark and Hell is Hot, then goes on an improbable tear for the ages, notching 5 consecutive #1 albums and over 75 million records sold worldwide, and becomes a legitimate Hollywood movie star. This is the part where we become captivated by his relentless and raw and revered vulnerability, and marvel at his humility and passion, and are uplifted by his prayers and become addicted to his conversations with Damien that all became visceral touch points for a generation. This is the part a half-decade before we start to become critical of his constant run-ins with the law and not really considering that the large majority of those run-ins are non-violent drug offenses. The part where we become judgmental over his inability to kick his addictions and start saying things to ourselves like, man, DMX should have been bigger, and if I were in DMX's shoes, I wouldn't have made the same mistakes, or I can't believe DMX squandered it all. This is the part where Earl Simmons' demons get exponentially louder and seemingly no longer avoidable for DMX. DMX died April 9, 2021 of an apparent overdose. He was on life support for a week and showing little to no brain functionality. He was 50 years old. This is a tragedy that affected millions of us worldwide. He's the only artist that I can think of whose outward and resolute faith in Jesus Christ never polarized his audience. And I believe that to be because there was never an inkling of hypocrisy in his projection. Out of all the outpouring of love for X, this tweet resonated most with me. My father said that DMX is the embodiment of living a full life. He's been dirt poor and he's been a multimillionaire. He's been in prison and he's performed in front of 400,000 people. Yet every time you see him, he's happy as can be. There aren't any negative stories. This is absolutely true. And while we all lost a little bit of ourselves through his passing, I can't say that his passing is necessarily surprising given the life of Darkman X. Here's a man that was abandoned by his mother, tricked into being a crack addict, thrust into the life of a career criminal, and became one of the world's most iconic artists without ever pump faking. The phrase hip hop saved my life speaks directly to the culture, but I don't know if there's another artist it applies to more literally. Earl Simmons saved millions of lives, including his own, through that microphone. And in that sense, to me, DMX is hip hop's greatest success story. I'm not sure he lives to 50 without it, but I do know all of our lives are better because he found it. Rest in eternal power, X. Thank you for being a light, inspire the darkness. I hope you're finally at peace. It's all happening.
That man suffered every day. That man suffered from the day that I known him. He suffered. When y'all heard his first song, he was suffering. You know why he was suffering? Because he took everybody's pain and made it his. His humanitarian work should be celebrated. He was in so much pain that he would go to jail to have his freedom. We lost a real giant. But he's not in pain no more. He's not in pain no more. You understand? I want to be selfish, but I can't. Everybody. He was the most loyal person I've ever known. He's been Rough Rider since day one. Everybody threw millions of dollars. You could not buy DMX. You couldn't buy him. He was never for sale. His loyalty for who he loved was never for sale. His family was never for sale. His integrity was never for sale. You might learn something from him.